Okay, welcome. This is the track in the legal compliance. Legal privacy compliance, a view from the trenches, those who are dealing with these issues day in and day out. So let me introduce our panel. To my left, we have MaryAnn O'Brien. She's the Chief Compliance Officer with LCMC Health. She's an attorney, compliance professional with 20 years of experience working in the healthcare industry in various capacities. She currently serves as Chief Compliance Officer for LCMC Health. A large integrated health system includes 9 hospitals, an anesthesia corporation, a network of physician offices, and urgent care links, and 2 adult care facilities. That's a lot. In that mission-critical role, Ms. O'Brien maintains an integrated, enterprise-wide compliance program to support the organization across all operating segments and leads a team of professionals who provide compliance oversight to the organization through policy development, education, training, auditing, and monitoring and investigations. At LCMC Health, Ms. O'Brien partners with the organization's IT security team to develop and maintain effective cybersecurity risk prevention and mitigation strategies, including DLP controls, workforce phishing education, and business associate vetting and monitoring procedures. Thank you, MaryAnn, for being here. And then to MaryAnn's left, we have Brad Powell. Brad is a co-founder and channel chief for Hook Security, one of our sponsors. Thank you. Brad is a serial sales professional and founder skilled in building business in niche markets with a focus on revenue growth. 15 years of experience in revenue growth for cybersecurity, physical security, managed service providers, hospital, and SaaS technology. Problem solving with government enterprise, small and medium businesses, and nonprofits for business growth, sales systems, strategic partnerships, relationship building, and driving revenue for managed service providers and the aging community. Business degree from the Citadel, the Military College of South Carolina, right? Yep. And an MBA in entrepreneurship and innovation from Clemson University, international business studies at Victoria University in Wellington, New Zealand. I'd like to hear about that over a beer, the New Zealand part. Welcome, Brad. And then we have Nick. Nick is the service delivery manager for CommTech Industries, my co-host. Nick has over 11 years of experience in information technology. After spending 6 years as a missile and space systems technician in the Air Force, he moved back home to New Orleans, began a new career as an IT technician. Nick started working for CommTech as a technician 7 years ago. Since then, he's been promoted to engineer, served as the engineering lead, and now manages the service adjustment at the service delivery manager. Welcome, Nick. Okay. So, I'll ask each panel member just to briefly add anything else to their resume, and sort of interested in where are you seated in the org chart, right? Who do you report to, and who reports to you, and whether it's your organization or if you're a service provider, right? How that works in your customers. So, MaryAnn.
Thanks, Ray. So at LCMC Health, I am the Chief Compliance Officer. I have a direct reporting relationship to our LCMC Health Board of Trustees, and I also report to the Chief Compliance Officer. So our legal department is split into legal, compliance, and risk management. We all work very closely together.
Oh, you each have your own?
Oh.
That's okay. I would say my previous world was physical security, and now I'm in cybersecurity. So that's something I did leave out. But I like to think like the bad guy, right? And so obviously a lot of what we do deals with compliance. But yeah, so that's one thing I wanted to physical security and thinking like the bad guy. That's something that I like to do as well.
Thank you, Brad. So I'm Nick, as Ray said, I'm the service manager over at CommTech. As far as the org chart goes, I report directly to our director of operations, and basically anyone who is technical in nature is under me. Our project services, our implementation team, our help desk, any engineers, and as well as those who perform compliance audits. as far as it relates to performing, compliance needs and all, we do compliance auditing for our clients, especially if they need like a HIPAA gap assessment, CMMC auditing for CMMC levels. We ourselves are compliant in these things too because of that. And so I help with training and carrying out those audits.
Great. Okay. Questions get harder now. Okay. So identify, 2 to 3 of the most challenging aspects of executing on achieving privacy compliance in your organization, or if you're a service provider, trying to achieve compliance in your customer's organization. So this time we'll start with Nick.
Starting me off.
Get the hard one first.
I know. Okay, so identify 3 of the more difficult aspects of gaining compliance. So from a service provider standpoint, I would say number 1 for us is really helping clients understand that they do have compliance needs. I think, us, especially when we're in the small to medium business market, it can be difficult sometimes for people to relate to, well, does this really apply to me? I don't do any of this. But, they forget with things like CMMC, if you've got federal contracts, then you're going to have to be compliant with this once it goes live. And HIPAA, if you've got health data, then we really need to look at what you're doing with it, what kind of information's in there, is there PAI, things like that. So it can be a battle just getting people to understand this. And like I said, we do audits and things to try to help people gain that understanding. I think the second aspect of it, once we've gotten them to recognize the importance of this compliance for them, and started that journey of building out policies and all, is getting the whole team behind this, right? I really liked one of the presentations, I think it was yours actually, said the difference between policy and culture, right, is a big deal, because we can write documents all day and we can say that as a company we're going to do X, Y, Z. But if the end users really aren't interested in it and they don't understand how their job as a mailroom clerk could be compromised and could be used at a detriment to their users and to their company, if they don't understand how important that is, then the policies kind of become useless, if being frank. And then the third one is would be keeping up with compliance standards. They change often. And as a service provider, we are having to look at both how we have to make sure that we are following compliance, how our third-party systems and our third-party vendors are following compliance, and then also what's changing for our clients and how we have to relay this to them. And so that is a constant battle. And as Ray talked this morning about various GDPR and the stuff California's trying to adopt, and as these things come live, what is that going to mean from an IT standpoint, and how quickly do we have to stand something up to get people compliance? So is that good enough?
That's great. Yeah.
Let me answer that first question too. I report to the CEO, and as one of the owners of Hook, we're keeping up with all those type of compliances and regulations and getting audits ourselves. But I would say we deal with a lot of different countries and regions. And so kind of what Nicholas was saying is really trying to make sure that we keep up with what's going on, making sure that those audits are going. But internally for us, I mean, we're on a path to try to get HIPAA compliant right now, which is very difficult. And so those are things that we're working on as an organization as well, because we want our customers to trust us. And it's just important. And so actually going through that ourselves has helped us in our communications with our MSPs that we work with and their customers that they work with. And so I would say, I mean, you touched on a lot of good ones, but that's what I would say.
So, yeah, I think you'll hear some commonalities here, but, we are most concerned. We have many security concerns at LCMC Health, but we are most concerned with hacking, like everyone in this room, right? Big surprise. And the Office of Civil Rights within the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, which is the agency that enforces HIPAA for anyone who's not in healthcare, they just published some data to Congress for calendar year 2021 that confirms that our fears are justified, right? That They received about 600 reports of breaches to patient health information in 2021. And hacking was responsible for 75% of those reports. So at first you might think, 400, not so bad nationwide. But the estimated impact on individuals was that those breaches affected about 3.5 million individuals. So you just think of the impact of hacking incidents. So I would say there are two buckets that we're really focused on to help mitigate and limit our risk of hacking incidents. And we look at our own internal human vulnerabilities, right? So our own employees clicking on, the really gnarly looking link that promises a free latte from Starbucks, right? But they don't see that it's Starbucks and not Starbucks. So really working with our own internal workforce, and then also working to make sure that the vendors that we're contracting with have good security controls in place, because we have to contract out labor to run our day-to-day operations. Who are we contracting with? How much risk are we being exposed to from contracting with those vendors?
Great. Any questions on any of that so far before we move on? Anybody? Okay. All right, so next question. What are some of the material changes over the last 3 years in terms of privacy compliance for you and your organization? Want to go first, MaryAnn?
Sure. So I think that there is this inherent inconsistency in federal government enforcement right now, at least in the healthcare space, where healthcare entities are being required to share patient information like never before. And there are some good reasons for this. They want healthcare providers, insurance providers to be sharing patient information to provide excellent care to patients throughout the care continuum. So there are no gaps in care. There's no duplication of services. So we can improve quality and do it in a more efficient manner. That does create major challenges when you are trying to share information safely while still respect patient privacy and trust. So I do think that's one big challenge that is very real time that we are facing and looking to problem solve on a daily basis. And then I think, as I mentioned, I think what's changed is just really the extent to which large health systems like ours rely upon business associates or vendors to do a lot of our operations. And that involves them having access to patient data. And so the more that there are these, relationships and engagements between large healthcare systems and business associates, we really need excellent vetting and management strategies to make sure that our vendors and their vendors and their vendors all the way down the line have good security controls in place.
I would say, our partners and our customers are really our guiding light when it comes to compliance. But I would say over the past 3 years, the CMMC has really been something that we've been following. And even to the tune of our chairman of the board and myself were in DC beginning of the year with some supply chain management companies and government officials talking about supply chain issues and just what the CMMC is actually going to be rolling down. If you like bidding on these government contracts, then you have to be most likely CMMC compliant. And so we're seeing that pretty big over the past 3 years, and has really driven us on how we're building out specific training modules, and how we're delivering the content that we need to deliver to adhere to those regulations. And CMMC is still a moving target, but that's one big one that we've seen the past 3 years that I'm sure you guys have heard CMMC before. But
Why don't you let the group know what CMC stand for and generally?
so
what
it's
that might
the
be?
cyber maturation model, and it really is a framework for, really a lot of the supply chain. Like, so for instance, when COVID hit and we had the mask issue where we had masks that were just, we couldn't find them. We literally had people in the DoD, we had people all over in the government Googling where to find these things. And so you can imagine maybe some of the links and some of the things that they would have started doing transactions with to get masks for us as Americans. But yeah, so the CMMC is coming down pretty hard. I think we're looking in May, June. Don't quote me on that, but things should be getting settled in on that, right?
Yeah, because at first I think it was a 5-level system. I think they've simplified it now to 3 levels. And just to do business, you have to at least meet the baseline, and then two now, yeah, 2 just to do business federal. So, and then depending on what else you need, you'll have to go up the chart and add more and more things in there. Really good points on both fronts, especially with the vendor stuff. I think in the last 3 years, and COVID's a great example because it's kind of what kicked off the 3 years. There was a mad scramble for information technology in general and how to share things. And I think what's concerning to me about that is that when we go to our vendors, right, and these are some multinational companies that we're talking about, and we say, hey, can you give us a BAA real quick? We need an updated BAA from you guys, which is for HIPAA business agreement. And they're going, yeah, sure. And we know how to do that. And it's like, okay, and then 3 days later, I get an email from one of the attorneys like, yeah, we have something like that. I need to talk to somebody. And so as these compliances are coming out, CMMC, as HIPAA starts getting audited harder and harder, I think our vendors and the people who your vendors are using are going to have to come up with frameworks to share their information and share what they're doing and all correctly. CMMC is going to be a big one. And I think also the focus on how you can be down that supply chain, and you may believe today that that this doesn't actually apply to us, but you find out that you have a customer who is FedRAMP or is state or something, and in actuality this totally applies to you. There's been a lot of changes over the last 3 years. I would say probably 30% of our clients found out that this whole time they were supposed to be in compliance with something that they had no idea of. I'll start. Yeah. So first off is open communication. Email. Don't waste time. Don't try to figure out who. Just email your first contact and say, this is what we really need. Who needs to get us involved? Because like I said, I've noticed there's not a bunch of great ways. A lot of times on websites, they might have like an about us link or something about the compliance levels they have. They'll normally have an email address. You can email about it. But it all starts with identifying what you're beholden to and what you need to verify they have. Do my vendors have to have a SOC 2 audit performed? Do they, do I need business agreements signed, things like that?
One of the things that we have at Hook that we've been implementing really this year, and I cannot think of the name of the platform. I'll have to look it up. Our CEO implemented it after I kept talking to him about, hey, we were sitting down, we had this great conversation. We want to bid on this project, but we can't, right? Because we either have to fill out a vendor assessment is one thing that we get requested a lot. And when I get those requested, I'm like, yes, okay, we'll fill this out for you. You're the exact kind of customer we want to work with that's thinking about these things. And then, but we have a platform that we build in all of our certs on. And then it basically, I could send that to MaryAnn and say, MaryAnn, here is all of our certs. We're HIPAA compliant. We're, CMMC certified. We're, ISO, whatever, right? And so those are things that we're doing on the vendor side, on the provider side, to even help that process and be ahead of that, so that when we do have those conversations with Ray or MaryAnn, I can hand it to Nick and say, here it is, right? So.
Yeah, we're seeing this more and more too, because we did implement a vendor risk assessment or a vendor security questionnaire a couple of years ago. And in the beginning, it was difficult to get vendors to complete them. And we do not encounter that anymore. For the most part, I think vendors are really, aware that this is an expectation now. But that process is owned by me and by our Chief Information Security Officer. So that security questionnaire has a lot of information related to security controls, whether or not they're doing an annual risk assessment, whether or not they are doing cyber tabletop exercises, whether or not they have a list of vendors and they require, whatever their requirements are for their vendors and subcontractors. And then on the other side, we're also asking them about, how are they training their own employees? What policies and procedures did they have in place? And then thirdly, because we are worried about financial risk, I asked them about cybersecurity. Do you have cybersecurity insurance? What are your limits? What roles and responsibilities are you going to take on in this engagement? How are you going to indemnify us? So I think there are 3 prongs. There's a technical controls prong. There's more administrative and physical safeguards that are more the people and the systems. And then there's the financial safeguards as well in insurance and indemnification.
Follow up? Good. Your question answered? Okay, thank you. All right, so we're talking about what's happened sort of over the last 3 years. So let's, sort of play it forward, right? Looking forward, how might your role in privacy compliance evolve over the next, 2 to 5 years? What do you see on the horizon?
So I think our role as service provider is going to be more boots on the ground. I think gap assessments are a huge thing that companies are starting to realize they have to be performing regularly to ensure that they're staying compliant. I think companies like CommTech are going to end up having a huge lag of business that's just doing this. Right now, when we're doing an audit, our project team is doing it. They might be doing a network installation the next day, or they might be setting up an application the following day. But chances are within the next 5 years, we're going to have a dedicated team just performing these governance functions.
I mean, AI is going to be huge, right? And I said it earlier, but we're really focused on human intelligence at Hook, and we have to be very aware of what's going on with AI, because we got to figure out ways to train on it, and I think it's really cool stuff, but it's also very scary at the same time to know what the capabilities are. So I think that's very important for us, and as we're looking towards the future, and then cyber insurance is huge right now as well. Going into 2023, we are seeing the annual trainings, and humans going through trainings every year being absolute must. So we're feeling that security training is actually starting to is catching up, and we're starting to see more and more effective training, right? Not just check the box training. And so that's where I would say.
Yeah, I really agree with that. And I'll share with you kind of our journey on, the road to effective security training, because we introduced initially security training as part of annual regulatory training, which I'm sure whatever industry you're in, you go through, people love it, right? They really pay attention to it. They absorb all that information. Very effective. So we had the outcome from that you would expect. We knew what our baseline was. We had done some fake phishing emails to our workforce. We knew what our baseline was. We introduced this annual training, didn't move the needle that much on fails. And fails are when employees open the email, they click on the link, that's a fail. But then sometimes they go further and enter their own information and credentials. And we had those massive fails as well. So we did invest in some software called KnowBe4, which automates these phishing campaigns. And we did try to get a little sneakier than just the Starbuck example that I gave earlier, although we still got fails on those. And then we also had kind of this evolution with that service as well, because we did not see great improvement initially with KnowBe4 either. However, what has moved the needle for us is doing a fake phishing campaign. If somebody fails, they get instant feedback. Like they get instant emails saying, hey, you just clicked on an email that you shouldn't have, and here's why. So instant feedback, instant education, and that has really resonated with people. And what we found is we used to have repeat offenders, right? Well, if you're a repeat offender 2 times, you get placed in a bucket where you get repeat training on repeat phishing on a monthly basis with that instant education. And we've seen that have a significant impact where we really were having trouble moving the needle. We have a workforce of over 13,000 people. One person clicks on that nasty link and you could have a compromise there.
And I don't know how many of you were in Brad's presentation earlier about hook security, but making sure that training is something that's going to stick in their head and is not just a checkbox or a yearly CBT that they're going to go through, really does make a difference. We track our numbers, and I think when they're doing things like what MaryAnn's talking about, when they're getting instant response and when the training actually matters, we're seeing things drop. We'll normally have I think we talked about earlier, like a 20 to 28% fail rate on the baseline. And we personally are seeing on our 2 largest clients, we saw an 80% reduction in the first year of using the service. And so I'll let you.
Well, I don't have anything else to say other than that. I'll just be repeating, but I would say, phishing testing and phishing testing and training is super important, and it's something that I love talking about. But MaryAnn and Nicholas really stole the show. That everything that I was going to say, they said.
And I'll just say on that note, before we're using that in a law firm, right? Nick, you guys have recommended that, I don't know, 3, 4? How long?
We're going to be switching to hook.
Okay.
Now I can make you laugh.
All right, good. I'm glad. I like to laugh. All right. Okay, so everybody has a war story, right? One, maybe probably more than one, right? Maybe you can tell it here. Maybe it's something more when you're drinking a beer or a cocktail, but hopefully it's one you can share here. So maybe I'll start with you, MaryAnn. Is there one story you want to share about the incident and why you laugh or maybe pulled your hair out or both, right? So.
Yes, certainly. We had a reportable breach a few years ago. So that's a breach affecting over 500 individuals. And of course, these always start with such good things happening, right? So back in, to 2013, LCMC Health started managing the then interim LSU hospital, which is the former charity hospital, rescuing this hospital, from extinction. For anyone who's local to New Orleans, that's now University Medical Center of New Orleans. But we were not the only ones. There were other hospitals and health systems all over the state of Louisiana that did these public-private partnerships with the state of Louisiana to rescue foundering hospitals. And as part of those transitions, LSU retained a lot of the administrative functions. And so, unfortunately, they experienced a major potential breach. It wasn't a confirmed extrusion of data, but there was a penetration in their email system. And this just goes to show how just innocuously this can start, right? So, and then one of their employees clicked on an email. It was a phishing email. It allowed intrusion into their server, and that employee had an archive folder within their email account that had hundreds of thousands of emails in that folder. So you think about things like no purge schedule, no purge policy on email, no archive that exists outside the network, training to employees on phishing. And that one incident impacted, I think, 5 or 6 health systems across the state and over 100,000 patients potentially that all needed to be notified that there was a potential compromise. So, I guess my message with this war story is that it is very simple things that can help prevent the disaster. And so I'm sure these guys have war stories too, so I'll pass it along.
Well, I get fished every day, it feels like, at Hook. And myself personally, I'm always trying to keep myself aware of these things. But I want to tell a war story of a phishing simulation. It's not really a war story, but it's a phishing simulation story because we're talking about SIMs and we're talking about real breaches. This one was luckily not a real breach, but we sent out a campaign to one of our MSP customers, and it just so happens that this young lady was buying a house that day. And it was a business email compromise. It was very devious, very tricky. We actually have pulled this from our template library because it was so devious. But she put her whole banking information into a landing page that we created, freaked out, and clearly we had to write some thank you notes to her and thank you notes in sincerity, because her whole closing was held up for like another month because she shut down her bank, and this happened the day of. And obviously we didn't know that she was buying a house that day because we were working with the MSP, not CommTech, but another one. And our team felt so bad, but she was like, this is a great training experience for me. But she was still a little angry too, because, she didn't get to move into a new house, and that set back a whole bunch of storage units and all this other stuff. But I will say, in the line of work that we do, we're privy to see some of the things that are happening with small businesses, and they are getting crushed with these phishing campaigns. And it's the simple things like MaryAnn's talking about. It's like putting a 1 instead of an L in the domain. And it's the little teeny tiny things that they're doing that are really tricking these users to clicking on things. So I'll call it a war story because it felt like war. when we were trying to keep the MSP happy and the customer and apologize. But
Let everybody know what an MSP, what that stands for. Yeah.
so that's a managed service provider, right? That's CommTech.
Thanks, Brad.
Thanks.
All right, war story, just one. We do a lot of cleanup after ransomware or breach incident or security, things like that. I think the one, and I'm going to tell this one so we can kind of talk about what not to do, kind of like what MaryAnn started with. But we had the most recent kind of one that lasted the longest happened December of last year. Fairly large client, about 300 users, and they're in the real estate business. And we got a frantic call saying that nobody can get in anything on Christmas morning. And of course, being that it's Christmas morning, it takes a little while to mobilize a response force there. And long story short, they got ransomware, a pretty nasty double entendre of two different types. And it had hit every single computer they had, every server they had. The way they got in, we actually, it could have been prevented because of this. About a month before, around Thanksgiving time, one of the IT guys on site, one of their IT personnel, found that a user was logging into a bunch of servers they shouldn't have logged into. And so they called the user and reset the password, and that was kind of the end of it. So kind of the first thing is, like, if you see something, say something like somebody probably should have ran a red flag. Come to find out, they had in-house Exchange servers, which, by the way, if you have those are one of the highest forms of compromise from a brute force attack, because they're always on the internet, and they have to be patched constantly. So just FYI. But the attacker got in via email, just like they're talking about. And statistically speaking, when it comes in, it's most likely going to come in that way. I think 80+% of all of these attacks are coming in from a user letting them in normally via email. In this specific scenario, they were inside the system. They took over this person's email account, had got all of the data out of their email, and then they used that person's account to then phish other people in the company with an internal email on how to get their credentials. And so they ended up having 4 or 5 different username and passwords, of which 2 of them were admin accounts. And so they actually got everything in the system from a data standpoint. What happened was the company told us that they're starting to become concerned because they're seeing some things that they think someone might be in. So what we did is we came in there and we installed MDR, which is managed endpoint response software called Sentinel-1, which most cybersecurity insurances are going to ask you to have as soon as they take over. And the hacker, attacker, whatever term you want to have for them, saw us doing this, and they unleashed the payload, which was the ransomware. They waited until about 2 a.m. Christmas morning when they knew nobody would be around, and that deleted the system. We talked before on the last panel about kind of how long that takes, but from an insurance standpoint, we were not allowed to touch the system for about 3 weeks because of the amount of forensics they had to run. And even though we wanted to start, bringing things online, they simply wouldn't let us until they knew that, where the attack came from, that it was going to be a covered incident, that we knew that we could restore it to an area or an environment that wasn't just going to get attacked again. And of course, cybersecurity came in. The first thing they said is, is Sentinel-1 everywhere? Do you have multi-factor? All the things we've kind of been talking about all day. And this company, we had asked them a year ago, and then 6 months before, and then 9 months before, to sign off on these EDR and MFA software. And they kept saying, well, we're going to, budget for next year. And then unfortunately, this happened before they implemented those. And so kind of a lot there, but I think had they had end user training, which we have implemented for them now, the end users, I think, would have been aware that these things were happening. Had they had some kind of EDR, which I know I've used that term a few times, but that is a more advanced version. It's kind of like the next generation of antivirus. It actually uses artificial intelligence and behavioral learning to figure out if something happening on a computer is malicious, as opposed to just scanning it against an attack it's seen before. So, had they had something like that in place, it would have been stopped. And then had they had a 24/7 monitoring service that could have caught it, Christmas night when it started, could have been prevented there. So that's the biggest one in my
That's
head.
Any questions? I'll share one that's not as dramatic as any of these, but so a number of years ago, new client got referred to us, had an incident, ransomware, and that no insurance, right? So no insurance, because part of my point is the forensics, right? And so we started calling around to folks we'd used before to come in and do the forensics, and we couldn't get anybody. It was so busy, right? We couldn't find folks that had come in before to help us do the forensics to find someone. And we eventually found someone. So what's my point? If you have one of the great benefits of cyber insurance, I mean, you can get it, is they've got these SWAT teams, right? They come in under the policy, the forensics, all the notices, maybe some PR stuff. It depends on what's in your policy, but they come in and handle all. And that's what you want. That's what you're hopefully, paying for. But when you go naked and you don't have any insurance, so you're calling whoever, like, you're calling us. So we're trying to run through the incident response, and you can't touch it. You don't want to touch anything till you get, the forensics done. So what's my message? If you don't have insurance, and it is harder to get insurance today, or it's too expensive, you need to think about retaining a forensics firm, right, under your incident response plan. I don't know if this was talked about in one of the other, about having a forensic team, under retainer, a law firm under retainer, maybe a PR firm under retainer, all of that in your incident response, even if you can't get insurance, because when it happens, you need to call on everybody right away. And if you don't have them, you may not be able to find them, or it may take a while to find them. So that's my one more story. So, all right. There's a question? Wait, there's a microphone. Wait, thank you.
No, I'll use that. Thank you. You had talked about doing all this phishing training with sending stuff out, and if somebody offends, they get immediate feedback. I'd also read about sort of a problem with that is that get employees who eventually won't click on anything, even something legit. And I was wondering, I mean, it sounds like you have great success rate with the training that you've been doing, but I'm wondering if that's been an issue and how you combat that.
That's interesting. And I haven't heard reports of that happening. I can see that being a potential downside. What we do tell people is, for instance, there are attacks where a bad actor will get access to someone's email address. And what we say is, if you don't routinely get emails from Greg Fern, our CEO, Greg Fern is probably not emailing you. But even more so, if you are getting an email that just has a link in it, or even an email from one of our systems, like we're about to go to Workday, if you're getting an email from Workday and it has a link in it, don't click the link in the email, go to the application on your desktop. So we try to just educate folks on where they should be doing what. Read an email you get. If there's a link in there, and it's a link from an application, go to the application on the desktop. If it's an email that's blank or sounds strange and has a link in it, it's from someone you don't usually receive emails from, pick up the phone and call that person. I think you're right that, but I do think it's a safer problem to have, right? that an employee not clicking on an email they think is suspicious is preferable to them not being as vigilant and just clicking away.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think the ones that I was reading about involved like public shaming at the next security meeting.
That's terrible.
I know. So there's just nobody wanted any part of that.
Yeah, I was telling these guys earlier that as a compliance officer, compliance gets a terrible rap, right? So I really try to be the kinder, gentler compliance officer. And that's really how we approach compliance and security, IT security, because you have to, it's a partnership. If you treat it any other way, you're not going to be effective. Yeah, that's terrible.
I-
Sure, it happens.
I was actually on a call with the CFO yesterday afternoon, and we were talking about an incident one of his employees had. You guys probably heard about this. Somebody emails them with the president of company's email address and says, "I need you to go buy 15 iTunes gift cards," right? And he's going up, "I can't believe this person did that yet." And, we had to explain, well, really smart people fall for these things.
All the
When you're in a
time.
hurry, you're a brand new person, fresh out of college, maybe, and you're looking to impress, like, oh yeah. And it's not until you send those numbers that you're like, you know what? That probably wasn't really, And so we're like, you can't, please don't berate them or like, do something really bad to them, because you want all of your people to come forward like, I did this bad thing. Like, you want to know, right? You don't want to scare them from doing that.
And I'm sure they felt stupid enough already.
Exactly. It's a self-correcting mistake a lot of times.
Any other questions?
Maybe not a question, but maybe a statement. So you talked a little bit about insurance, and part of compliance, we didn't really cover it today, but should be, there are warranties and conditions on insurance policies that you have to meet for you to protect your balance sheet. So if it's not part of your compliance to check your policies and understand what your responsibilities are, you can get in trouble. I think it was kind of alluded to a little bit about waiting 2 or 3 weeks for the insurance company to do their forensics, but just something to consider when as part of compliance.
Yeah,
Good
and
point,
it's not
good point.
the,
Yeah.
the 2 to 3 week thing. That was it's normally not that long. Normally in about 2 or 3 days, they've gotten all their ducks in a row. That was a very bad instance. But to a point, we've also had clients tell us, well, I have cyber insurance, so I'm not worried about doing all this stuff. And then we're like, can you please email us your policy? And then we outline the first paragraph that says you must be doing X, Y, Z, or none of this applies. Yeah.
What you were doing before the next year.
There's a reason the insurance company asks you to fill out an application about what you're doing, and that is the part of the underwriting package. So if you're not doing it, right, I mean, if there's an issue there, you may not have the coverage you think, right? Okay. Well, thank you so much, and we have a break, and then we'll all be in the other room for lunch. So thank you, guys. That was great.